All right, everyone. Well, thank you for being with us. Just as I started that treatment, a little bird came over to the window and was actually pecking at the window here while I was treating. I couldn't get a glimpse of it, but I could certainly hear it. So it's kind of neat. So what we want to talk about this morning is what we talked about in the opening treatment, and that is that each and every one of us wants to be clear. We want to understand. We want to decide how it is that we wish to come to know God more fully this year, more completely this year. So we're going to use the metaphor for the next several weeks of cultivating our soul as we would cultivate a garden. So I have to tell you a little story. When Lori and I were first married, we grew up in New York City, which is kind of, you know, the least countrified place in the whole world, I think. It's just complete urban center. There's concrete and asphalt everywhere. And only a few of the people that I knew tried to grow any fruits or vegetables in a tiny, and I'm talking about a postage stamp size garden that might be maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. And they would have one or two tomato plants and sometimes a corn plant, and that was it. That was about as close to vegetable gardens as we saw. But we wanted to leave New York when we got married. We wanted to move somewhere in the country where we could be closer to the land, where we could raise our children in an environment where they would kind of get a feel for the soil and for nature, and you can kind of cue in. You can imagine growing up in New York City, and you can hear Buffy St. Marie coming in and singing, all the lights on Broadway don't amount to an acre green. And that was the feeling of excitement, of adventure that we had when we married, that we were going to leave the city and go out into the country and find a place where we could have rabbits in a pen, where we could grow fruits and vegetables, where we could can our food in the fall and put put lots of good food in a deep freezer and eat off the fruit of the land. So we did. We moved from New York City down to Hickory, North Carolina, and our first house was a tiny little 3-bedroom cinder block house, and I think it was on about a half of an acre of land. And for us, that was paradise. That was the Garden of Eden for us. And we were able to go out, excuse me, measure off on the lot, around the trees and things that were in there, and actually went and got a few pens and got some rabbits and raised rabbits, and they gave us great manure to use on the garden and in the compost piles. And got a shredder at Sears, a chipper shredder, and used to shred all the newspapers in the neighborhood and all the leaves I could get, and any organic material I would shred in that shredder and put it into the compost pile and wet it down, mix it with the manure, and it would turn into this beautiful black compost. And we went and we measured off an area that we could plant vegetables. That was the the limit of how much room we had, that without kind of turning the front lawn into a vegetable patch. And we knew how much room we had, and we knew kind of the things we wanted to grow. And one of the most exciting times of the year was when the seed catalog came. We used to get this big seed catalog in the mail, and I'm sure you've all seen seen a seed catalog, but this one was big. It was in a tabloid format. It was probably 12, 14 inches high and 8 inches wide, and it was printed in color, but not on glossy paper, more like on newsprint. And when the seed catalog came, it was an exciting time of the year. You knew spring was coming, and what we would do is we would sit around, we would get the kids, and we would all be kind of in a big pile, and we'd be looking at this catalog together, and we'd be turning the pages together, ooh and ah, and look at this and look at that, and we'd be making our decisions. We had our little sheet of graph paper with the garden layout on it, in pencil, how many feet we could go in either direction, how many rows we might be able to put in. And we'd read the description of everything that we wanted to grow. Big boy tomatoes were popular back in the 70s. We were going to grow some big boy tomatoes and Silver Queen corn, and we read in it, it says plant pole beans at the base of the corn stalk. Pole beans will climb up the corn stalk, and you get two crops in the same space. And oh, that sounded like a good idea. And we turned to the page with the watermelons and the pumpkins, and they would have pictures of little children with their little red wagon pulling these watermelons and these pumpkins out of the garden that were so big that the child could barely move the garden. You know, the kids would all point at that. Yes, that's what they wanted to grow. They wanted a pumpkin that big. They wanted a watermelon that big. And we would go through and we'd have to decide, you know, that we didn't have room to grow everything. We couldn't do everything all at once. And of course, everything looked so appetizing and wonderful. You know, if we had 40 acres, maybe we could plant everything that appealed to us. But we couldn't. We didn't have the time. We didn't have the space. So we had to make some decisions. We had to pare it down. We had to figure out what could we do with the resources that we had available to us. And we'd have a discussion about what we could grow, what we couldn't grow. Did we have enough room? Did we were we trying to do too much in the space we had? Which the answer was always yes. We were always trying to do more. But eventually we would come and we would make our decisions, and we would go ahead and order our seeds. Now, having done that, having gone through that process, what that process is that is a visualization. That is what Ernest Holmes called, a treatment in visual form. We could see it, we could feel it, we could taste it. We could imagine when we looked at the pictures of those tomato plants, we could imagine what it would be like to go out in the summertime and pick a tomato fresh off the vine and bring it in the house and wash it up and slice it up, put it on some bread with some mayonnaise, and just have tomato sandwiches fresh from the garden. All of that was there as we were looking at this at the catalog. All of that feeling was there. All of that sensation was there. All of the emotion was there. And it is as Thomas Troward says, once you have seen the end result as an already accomplished fact, you have willed the ways and the means. You have, by cooperating with the law of mind, you have planted the seed into mind, and that seed has no choice but to grow. So we want to look today, we want to start looking at choosing and deciding, and for the next couple of weeks we're going to look at the metaphor of cultivating our soul, how growing a garden and cultivating our soul are similar, and how by relating to the way that the soil takes whatever seed we give it and produces in kind to us, to understand that the creative medium, the soul of the universe, the law of mind, in a similar manner takes whatever it is that we give to it and produces it in our lives in like kind. But what we want to consider before we get into that is, what is our purpose here? Why are we here on this planet at this time? What is the purpose of life, perhaps, is another way to put it. And I suggest that we want to come to a realization that our purpose is to discover our true nature. To discover, in Buddhism they tell us to accept things as they are. But that is not a complacency of just saying, well, that's the way it is. It's an examination of what is reality. What is the true nature? And each and every one of us, if we stop and think about it, what we must be is an individualized expression of God. That which we call soul is the point where God is individualized as us. So each of us is soul. Each of us is an individualized expression of the divine. And we are in a perfect environment in these bodies, in this atmosphere, in this plane of existence. We are in the perfect place for the growth of our soul at this time to make that discovery. Thomas Troward talks about the fifth kingdom, and he says that if you look at life, if you look at evolution, and you look at how life has moved forward, that all of life conspires to constantly raise itself to another level of intelligence and mobility. If you think of the tiny single-celled animals and the level of intelligence that they have, there's an intelligence operating there. There's no doubt. There's something within them that knows what to do and how to do it. Now, it is not likely a conscious intelligence, not likely a self-aware intelligence, but there's an intelligence there. There's something that knows what to do. It just absolutely amazes me when you stop and think about some of these toxic waste sites where human beings have gone in and utterly trashed the earth. And in the soil, tiny microbes have begun to take that toxic waste and break it down into harmless components. Now here's a tiny single-celled animal. As far as we know, it can't think or reason. But it knew exactly what to do in order to preserve life, in order to protect life. Now I'm not saying that to give people liberty to go out and pollute the earth because they think that somehow the earth will fix it. That's not the point at all. What I'm saying is that there's an intelligence that operates even at what we would consider to be one of the lowest forms of life, a single-celled animal. And at every step of the chain of evolution, at every step as life moves forward, it moves forward for greater mobility. It develops legs and feet and arms, and it can move, and it develops a greater degree of intelligence, of understanding. From that single-celled animal, we kind of move into perhaps plants. And the first plants couldn't move at all. And then we start to find plants that actually move. They can actually change. If you watch sunflowers, we had sunflowers in our garden one year. And it's amazing to watch the sunflowers because when the sun comes up, they turn and they face the sun. And as the sun transits the sky, the sunflowers turn with them. And it's just absolutely amazing to see. We had grapevines at one time, and if you would go out, you have to go out periodically and you have to tie the vines up to the trellis. And in the process of doing that, many of the leaves get turned upside down. They're kind of a real silver gray on the bottom, so it's easy to tell when they're upside down. They're dark green on the top. So we'd go out and tie everything to the trellis, and half the leaves would be upside down. But within the course of a couple of hours, they had rotated. There was movement. They knew how to move in a manner to accept their good. And Troward tells us if you look at every iteration of life up to humankind, that evolution has conspired, life has conspired, nature has conspired to produce a being such as us, capable of recognizing its unity with God, with life, with all things. So our purpose then, and what Troward tells us is once we make that discovery, evolution can take us no further. Once we make that discovery, we have the responsibility and the accountability to cooperate with the spiritual laws of the universe and to continue our growth. We have to direct our growth from that point on. Right? Nature blindly took us from the single-celled animal at a primordial slime and brought us to a being capable of thinking and choosing and willing and deciding. But once we have reached that point, it is up to us to take it the next step. So I believe that next step, I believe that purpose in life is for us to discover more intimately more personally, the presence of God within, the presence of God as us, the presence of God in us. It may also be called the Christ. It may be called the Father within. It may be called Spirit. But we are here not to continue to wallow, if you will, in the things that got us this far. We are here to move forward to the next step. And what we must recognize when we get to that point is that God cannot do for us what it has created us to do for itself, for ourself, excuse me. It's set up evolution to bring us to the point of self-awareness. But once we have reached that point, it cannot coerce us or force us or choose for us. A common mistake people make is God is going to decide for me. No, God has decided that you need to decide for yourself. You cannot sit around and wait for God to decide. So it's like sitting here with the seed catalog in your lap and looking out there at where the garden is going to be in your yard and thinking that God is going to come along and plant the tomatoes for you, and God is going to come along and plant the corn for you, and God is going to come along and plant the pole beans for you. And God cannot do that for you. God created you to make that decision. And if you choose not to decide, it cannot and will not decide for you. So if we accept that line of reasoning, if we accept that logic that we are here to discover the divine nature within us, and we have arrived at a point in consciousness and human evolution where we are responsible and accountable for making our own choices, it can be both an exciting time and it can be an overwhelming time. It's exciting because the future is just ours. The future is unlimited. The future of coming to know God in some wonderful and particular way is what our life is about. It's not about winning at anything. It's not about making more stuff. It's about knowing God, And look at our excuse me, look at our societies, look at our cultures, and look at what they have valued and what is important. It seems like in our culture, if it can't be counted and measured in the gross domestic product, doesn't matter. We don't need to look at it. If it doesn't show up there, then what good is it? And that's the way our laws seem to be, and that's the way our lobbyists seem to be. And you have to stop and ask and say, well, but where is the value of the soul in that? Where is the quality of life in that? Even at a very pragmatic level, where is the infant mortality rate measured in that? And it's not. It's not. Our society is willing to live with a higher infant mortality rate than other nations have. And where does the measurement show up? Where is the compassion in the gross domestic product? So we have to come to our own awareness, like the prodigal son. We have to come unto our own, and we have to start to ask ourselves, what is it that I want to grow this year? What is it that I want to have more of in my life this year? How on this wonderful, miraculous journey that we are on, where do I want to start? How do I get beyond being overwhelmed? And where do I want to start? How do I want to know God's love and God's peace? And is one need to come in front of the other? So I want to look at here at some ideas that we get from Tibetan Buddhism. And it's some ideas that might help us in the decision process. So I think we've accepted so far that we are accountable for deciding. If we don't decide, nobody's going to decide for us. There's There's no saint, savior, or member of the clergy that's going to come and go out there in our yard and make the decision and plant our garden for us. And if they do, it's temporary because they probably won't be here next year or the year after. We have to make that decision. But is there an order to our growth? Is there a progression to our growth? Are there things that we need to do? Do we need to put one foot in front of the other? And if so, what foot might that be? And what we're told in the Tibetan system, if we look at it, is that the first order of human life is survival. Right? This is what would be considered to be the root chakra. And Maslow kind of took the 7 chakras and put them into his pyramid. But the first thing that we're concerned with is survival. And what we're told is that there's a progression as we move up to our union with the divine, that there's a progression that we move through. And we can kind of tell where we are in our progression by what we pay attention to in life. And I think that's very, very important. And it's very true for all of us, whether we want to tie it into Tibetan Buddhism and their line of thought, or just by observing what's going on. The things that are on our mind, the things that we are concerned about, we are concerned about because of something within, not something without. 2 people can look at the same situation, 2 people can look at the same TV program, 2 people can look at the same news report, and each one will come away with a different meaning of what is important, what needs to be done. And that is because whatever the stimulus was, it has pushed a button within us. And that button within us that was pushed is revealing to us that an area that is important to us, where we might say perhaps an area where we want to grow. This is why you'll hear some of the Buddhists say, if someone makes you angry, you should thank them, because they have revealed to you an area where you're ready to grow. Remember, in that system, the ideal, if you will, is perfect balance and perfect stability, and not being affected by either that which people say is good or that which people say is bad. So if somebody were to come to you and say to you, oh, you're one of the most wonderful people I have ever met in my whole life, that's their opinion. If somebody comes to you and says, you're the worst person I ever met in my whole life, could we step back unattached and say, well, that's their opinion? And either way, not let our ego be caught up in the drama, if you will. Some people call me good and I like it, and some people call me bad and I don't like it. But can I be immune, if you will, or insulated from that drama? Can I be centered? So the things that we react and we respond to kind of give us a clue as to where we might be ready to do some growth. They kind of tell us what kind of seeds we want to buy this year. They kind of tell us how we want to come to know God more fully, more completely in our life. So the first order of business is survival. And the negative emotion that keeps us kind of stuck in dealing with those issues is fear. It is fear. I just read an article the other day, and they were talking about how much fear there is in the news and in the media and in the conversation that people have, and it just seems to be growing, and it's getting worse and worse, and there's more and more to be afraid of. And it certainly can seem that way if we pay attention to it. It can certainly seem that way, and there's a reason for it. The media outlets, if they can push that button and they can keep us hooked on fear, we keep tuning in. We become addicted to it, and we keep tuning in, and we want to know more. We have to have our daily fix of fear. So if you observe yourself in waking life or even in your dreams, what are you dreaming about? Are you afraid? then perhaps the seed that you want to sow this year is trust, is love, is peace. For we don't fear that which we love. We don't fear when we are experiencing peace. And we don't fear that which we trust. And that is a base. That is a base to start working from, because if we can't get away from fear, it's difficult to do anything else along our path. The next thing we might ask ourselves is, do I pay attention to lack? Do I pay attention to greed? Do I look at the news and I see how greedy people are, how greedy the politicians are, how greedy the corporations are? Lots and lots of stories in the news about that one. Everybody's trying to rip everybody off. The top 1% is trying to get richer at the expense of the lower 99%. All of these kind of things that are just drummed at us. And how do we respond to that? Do we resonate with that? Do we get upset with that? Do we go, yeah. And if that is a button that's being pushed and we want to move beyond it, then the seeds we want to buy are benevolence, generosity, realizing that there is enough and plenty to go around despite how much people hoard, and that our good does not depend upon other people, but it depends upon our consciousness, our connection with God. And perhaps we look at the world and we see the struggle for power and control and willpower and dominance, and the need to be right and to win, and how we turn on the news and we hear people, and they don't say anything other than I'm right and the other side's wrong. Stephen Stills had it right in the 60s. Everybody's carrying a sign that says hooray for our side. And if that's what's on our mind, if that's what we're paying attention to all the time, if that is what is predominant in our thoughts, then maybe the seed that we want to sow is the seed of acceptance, of recognizing that everybody is in their perfect place by right of consciousness. And I don't need to tell them that they're wrong. I don't need to be caught up in their drama. But I can accept that that is where they are and that is okay. But I have to accept where I am and recognize that that is okay. And sometimes we are overwhelmed by grief. We are overwhelmed by sadness. We are overwhelmed by loss, whether it be a personal loss in our lives of a loved one or a situation or job, or just a sadness, a loss in the world. And if that's what's coming to our attention, then what we want to do is we want to sow the seeds of love. We want to recognize that love can never be lost. That if one love leaves our life, then another love comes into our life. And that love is an energy, it's not a person or a situation. And we want to develop this sense of connectedness to all of life, to all of God, and to all of good. And perhaps what comes to our attention, or what we resonate with, or what we find ourselves paying attention to, is dishonesty and lies, and it upsets us that there are people who will lie to us, there are people who will lie to their country, there are people who will lie just to get whatever they want, and we become preoccupied with the truth. And what we must learn to do is to sow the seeds of truth, to recognize that God's truth is omnipresence, that the truth of God is everywhere present, that no one can lie to me when I remain centered in the truth. I will always know the truth. No matter what they say, I will always know the truth, because the truth is right where I am. So if I'm concerned about lies, about dishonesty, then perhaps it is the seed of truth, the packet that I want to order. Another thing that comes to our attention is ignorance. Sometimes we can't believe just how stupid things in life can be, how just completely ignorant people can be, and the other party can be, and all of these things. And we dwell on ignorance. And that's the button that gets pushed in us. As the Buddhists would say, that's the karmic trace that gets pushed in us. And we keep reacting out of that same old programming, you know. And what we must recognize is God's wisdom, the omniscience, the all-knowingness of God, which is also omnipresence. And if we recognize that God is all wisdom and God is everywhere present, then there can be no ignorance to defy God. There can be no ignorance to stand in God's way. And again, acceptance comes in, because if that's where people are, that's okay. If that's where I am, it's okay, because now I'm working out of it, you see. I have to recognize where I am so I can move forward. Everybody is awakening at his or her own pace. And the last thing that we might come to our attention in terms of looking at the negatives so we can move to the positives is dissatisfaction or unfulfillment. You know, sometimes this gets me. I look at the sadness in the world. I look at people who feel that their lives are wasted. You know, that there could have been so much better. That there's so much more. The drudgery maybe is a better way to put it. And the seed to sow there is the seed of bliss. The seed of knowing that God did not create any one of us to suffer. Suffering is an experience that we have. It is a temporary experience. It is not a permanent experience. And that ultimately each and every one of us will experience the bliss of the presence of God, of the unity with the presence of God. And of course, by us bringing our consciousness to that and acknowledging that that is the destiny, if you will, for each and every person, we in that regard invite it to come forward. Invite it to come forward through each and every one. So what we have to do is we have to kind of get that seed catalog out. There are seeds of joy and of trust. You know. There are seeds of benevolence and loving kindness. There are seeds of acceptance and forgiveness. There are seeds of love and consolation. Seeds of truth, seeds of wisdom, seeds of bliss. And I invite you to look at the garden and look at how much space you have this year. How much time do you have giving to tending your garden? How much time are you willing to make? Can you do 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night? Can you do several hours in the morning, several hours at night? Can you dedicate every waking moment and every sleeping moment to discovering more of the presence of God within? See, we're the only ones that can do it for ourselves. We have arrived at the point where it is up to us to declare that which we will have in our lives and to do the things that we need to do in order to invite the experience, to accept the experience. We're going to talk more in the coming weeks about caring for our garden. But the first step is deciding what seeds you want to purchase. What seeds do you want to come into your life? And you might ask, well, where would I buy a packet of such seeds? I don't see them in the seed catalog. I can't go to the garden center. Where do I find seeds of love and seeds of joy? And the seeds are the spiritual truths that you expose yourself to. Whether it be a talk such as this, a book that you might read, a spiritual practice such as your meditation, your spiritual mind treatment, your spiritual affirmations, the thoughts that you allow into your head during the day. All of these are seeds that come to you. Now they come to you as seeds because they need to be nurtured, they need to be cared for, and in time they will sprout, and in time they will grow. But the first step is you have to decide what kind of seeds it is that you are going to invite into your life this year. Now I will give you one suggestion. If you go over that list and say, well, where do I want to work? And where do I want to start? You want to start at whatever came first on this list. If it is fear that is a negative emotion that you find yourself caught up in, then you want to start with joy. You want to start with trust, and so on up the list. But there's one seed that I think should be in everybody's order, and that is a seed of love, because that underlies all of the others. And ultimately that is, if you wish to consider it this way, that the other six are just love expressing itself in some particular way. Because if you truly love, you're not going to fear. If you truly love, there's not going to be greed or lack. If you truly love, there's not going to be judgment or criticism or resentment. There is going to be acceptance, you see. If there's truly love, there will be truth, there will be wisdom, there will be bliss. So I would suggest that love and cultivating love and sowing love and coming to an understanding of what love is. See, we get the idea, love, but then we have to get the realization of the idea. But what does that mean to me, you see? And then we have to bring ourselves to the experience of it. So it's enough now if we start and say, this year, 2015, this year in my spiritual garden, the first thing I'm going to plant, the seeds of love. And then you can start deciding where you're going to obtain those seeds. What are you prepared to do? You might remember the movie The Untouchables with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. And Sean Connery was a beat cop in Chicago. He was helping the feds as they were going around breaking up the organized crime. And all throughout the movie, Sean Connery kept saying, well, what are you prepared to do? What are you prepared to do? Kevin Costner would say he was going to do this, that, or the other thing. And Sean Connery would say, but what are you prepared to do? What are you prepared to do? So I ask you to consider this year as we go forward together. We've been blessed. Each and every one of us has been blessed with another year to dedicate to our spiritual growth, another year to experiment in this laboratory of life, in this perfect environment that we have, where the love of God is made visible to us every minute of every day. So instead of seeing the fear, we can see the love. Instead of seeing the lack, we can see the abundance. Instead of seeing the will and the dominance, we can see individuals who are trying to find their soul at their own level. We can see the love, we can see the truth, we can see the wisdom, we can see that. See, those are the fruits that the garden will produce as the seeds the seeds that we choose to purchase this year are properly cared for and cultivated and grow. So I invite you then this week to give some consideration to this. If you could only work on one thing this year, just one, if you could work on one and you could give it everything you had, if you could care for it tenderly each and every moment of each and every day, what do you think that one should be for you? See, each of us is at a different place. We'd all like to say, well, yes, I want to do it all, I want to have it all, and I want to have it all now. But maybe our garden isn't big enough yet. Maybe we don't have enough time yet. Maybe we can't afford to work on everything all at once. Maybe it would be better to select one or two or three and work with them until they demonstrate in our lives. And as they demonstrate, then take on the next and the next and the next. So what do you want to grow in your garden this year? The seed catalog is here. It's an exciting time. We have to make some conscious choices. We recognize that nobody's going to come and make that decision for us because nobody can. Because God created us out of itself and requires that we decide. The law of mind is a willing partner, just as the soil of the earth is a willing partner. The soil of the earth will produce back for us whatever we put into us. It won't judge us, it won't criticize, it won't condemn, it won't complain. If we stick tomato seeds in the ground and care for them properly, we'll get tomatoes. But it will not plant the tomatoes for us. It will not plant the corn for us. That's our job. We have to decide. So I invite you, take some time, if you can, especially get out, if it's warm enough where you are, get out in nature and just look at how wonderful a job the creative medium of the earth does in producing so many variations. The trees, the shrubs, the grasses, the birds, the animals. There's an infinite variety of life. Life desires to express itself. And it created us out of that desire. And it is inviting us this year to use this time that we have to cultivate some aspect of God, to come to know God more fully, more completely, to allow it, if you will, to overwhelm us, to allow it to push those negative ideas away. For the positive and the negative will not exist in the same space at the same time. So to the degree that we turn our mind towards God, towards the aspects of God that we talked about today, we will be turning our mind away from the negative emotions that keep us stuck. Keep us stuck in the same place, spinning around in the same place where humankind has been for thousands of years. I invite you to think this year what seeds you want to acquire and how you're going to acquire them. That's all we need to do this week. How do you want to grow? How do you want to come to love God this year? That's all we need to do this week. We'll talk in future weeks about preparing the soil and planting and nurturing and weeding the garden. But for this week, I invite you to take the most important step. Because without this step, none of the others can take place. What seeds do you want to grow this year? What do you want to come to fruition in your life? And what are you prepared to do in order to get them? choice is ours. The divine planned it that way. And it could be no other way for us to be spontaneous individuals. So take some time today or this week. Get out your little pad and pen. Observe yourself as you react and respond to the world about you. What is it that comes up in your life? What is it that you react and respond to? How do you react and respond? And if there's any area of your life where you're not reacting and responding in a manner that brings you closer to God, then ask yourself if you don't want to buy a packet of seeds to plant the opposite. The choice is ours. The soil is willing to cooperate. Let's do our part. Open your seed catalog. Make your choice.